Okay, so we're going to finish up Chapter 6 for the Constitution. The Constitutional Convention, first thing listed, when they got together to revise the Articles of Confederation, Patrick Henry from Virginia didn't come. Several others that really didn't feel like maybe this was going to turn out well. But several were there: George Washington, Ben Franklin, James Madison. Your book really does go over a nice biography of a lot of those. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were not there, however, Adams and Jefferson being elsewhere overseas. For the plans at this point, the big question was going to be representation when it came to Congress. So two plans were devised. George Washington, by the way, had been elected the president of the convention and had decided, they started proposing different plans. The Virginia plan was one that had been proposed with the idea that first of all, they proposed having the two houses of Congress, but the Virginia plan taking the idea that the larger power chosen by vote, that representation would come from having by population, supported by the larger states. New Jersey plan wanted to keep the existing structure of Congress, which had been equal representation by all the states. So Virginia plan was starting to branch away a little bit. New Jersey plan sticking with some of the older structure in terms of at least trying to keep things equal, and that works out because they're a smaller state, and if it's based on population, then they're going to be out of luck when it comes to their representation in Congress, because they don't have as many people, so they won't get as much of a voice. So they want to keep it equal as much as possible. The two issues that come up with this is that, first of all, they were saying, do we need to amend this? Can we change it? When it came to changing Congress, and looking at just the basic form of their government, because right now all they had under the Articles was one body of Congress. And so there was one thing for sure: they said they need a central government to make taxes, to regulate commerce, to raise a military, make laws, to be able to have things to do, issue money, treaties, wage war. All of that was going to be needed for the central government. So that when it came to Congress and how to represent and how to structure it, they come up with a compromise, and known as the Great Compromise, which gives both groups what they wanted. So they're going to have the House of Representatives. We have a bicameral legislature. Two houses. The House of Representatives is going to be based on population, and the Senate is based on equal representation by the states. So compromise, giving both a little bit of what they had been wanting in terms of representation. Okay, so one of the other big questions at this point too was what to do in terms of representation when it came to slaves. The issue of slavery was really big at this time, and first of all, should they keep slavery? That had been a question asked during the Declaration of Independence, and they had voted to keep it in, just if nothing else, to preserve peace, because the southern states would not have stayed with the country had they tried to take away slavery at this point. So they decided to wait and fight that another time. When it came to representation, the southern states really wanted to have slaves counted towards their numbers because that gave them more people, which meant they would get more votes. The smaller states did not think that was fair because they weren't paying taxes on them, so if you're going to do one thing, you have to do both. And the compromise was the 3/5 compromise. And that was agreed on for taxation and representation. So slaves would count, but only 3/5. So each slave was worth 3/5 of a count towards population, which would go towards taxes and representation in Congress. The other thing too was the slave trade, and so they're going to set a limit. Congress did not want to get rid of the slave trade, but they will end the foreign slave trade 1808. Not slave trade within the states, that's going to keep going on, but international slave trade, so import, exports of slaves. Does it still happen? Of course, there's always smuggling, but this was the attempt to keep it or to get rid of it as soon as possible. For the separation of powers, there are three branches of government. For the legislature, that's Congress. State constitutions had set the example for separation of powers, and so they're going to set this up with our own basic form of government. The lower house of legislature was designed to be closer to the voters, the delegates elected every 2 years. And then you have the upper house every 6 years, trying to be a little bit more detached. And of course you have that being the Senate and the House of Representatives. For the executive branch, the president, decision was made that a single person made chief executive. It was a lot of hesitation on this because they were so afraid of having another king. George Mason was very apprehensive that this president, chief executive, would grow into a monarch. So they put the president's power that he could veto power, or had veto power, but his veto, which, if Congress tries to pass a law, he has the ability to veto it, but he can be overridden with a 2/3 vote in each house to put a check on that, so not one branch can overpower another one. He was made commander of the armed forces, makes treaties with 2/3 of Senate consent, appoints judges and diplomats. He's responsible for reporting yearly to the State of the Nation, recommending legislation. That's the State of the Union address that comes on every year. Limited in some areas, he could not declare war or make peace without Congress. Actually, Congress is the one that declares war, but he can recommend it, and can be removed from office. Impeachment is done by the House, and removal from office is done by the Senate. There's been several cases where presidents were impeached, but not removed from office, and we'll talk about those later. Several wanted to strengthen the independence of the executive by entrusting the choice to the popular vote, but they decided that would not be the best system, and so they're going to do the electoral college system, where electors will be chosen and use electoral college to separate the president from the popular vote. For the judiciary, the courts, there's a debate a little bit on the judiciary. The Virginia and New Jersey plans wanted a Supreme Court with one Chief Justice, having the power of judicial review, basically deciding if laws were or were not within the Constitution. It was implied it's going to be set as a precedent with later cases. Congress was forbidden to pass bills of attainder, basically saying laws that adopted after an event to try to criminalize deeds that have been committed. Just trying to put a check on that. Sovereignty was divided between the people and within the government. There's regulations on making amendments. Amendments had to be a 2/3 vote of each house. Amendments had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And then that goes into the last part, which is ratification. So when talking about ratification meaning approving or passing the Constitution. Anytime you talk about ratifying a law or ratifying the Constitution, it means that they accepted it, they passed it. Constitution would become effective upon ratification by 9 of the 13 states. The Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists are groups that emerged from that. Federalists were advocates of the Constitution because they support a very strong central government. Anti-Federalists were those who oppose a strong central government. They wanted, if they have a strong central government, they wanted to have protections for people's rights built into that. Federalists are going, some of the big names, Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay wrote the Federalist Papers, written in support of ratification. In the Federalist 10, Essay 10, Madison argues that the size and diversity of the nation would make it impossible for any single faction to form a majority that could dominate the government. He insisted that large republics, as opposed to small, could thrive as well. So talking about that, it's not bad to have a big government. Anti-Federalists talked about the dangers of power of strong government, wanted a Bill of Rights being added in to protect individual rights and states' rights, and that's going to be agreed on, that they need a stronger central government, national government, but they wanted to make sure that there were safeguards against tyranny, because that's what they had just fought over before. For the states, decision of the states, Delaware, New Jersey, and Georgia unanimous for the Constitution. Massachusetts was a little divided, but they're going to come in and ratify it later on. There's several others in favor, but it will be eventually ratified and accepted. And there's chapter 6.